Okay, so we are just going to go with some of the questions that I have been getting. There was one question that I received in one of the previous workstream introductory sessions. And that question was that it's a finance related question, and it says that it's going to be good to understand why there is a fee from innovators. On the surface, this seems to be counterintuitive to the overall mission of increasing innovation. So, in the panelists, do you think there's anyone who is well suited to answer this question? Dr. Del Nido, perhaps? You perhaps?
Yeah, I think it's a very important question because I think it gets at to the question of what does SHIP provide and how is it beneficial if you are an innovator or if you're a startup company. And as I said before, even if you are a large company that's developing a pediatric device and are trying to make the finances meet, it is expensive to take a device through the regulatory process and into the commercialization. And there are many components of the evaluation of the device, both on the bench, in animal testing, and then eventually in the clinical, that are quite costly. And so the fundraising is required in most cases, in whether you raise funds from investors, whether you raise funds from small business innovative research grants, from federal sources, or even philanthropic. It is still expensive, and most inventors and most startup companies have limited budgets. If the SHIP provides a way to accelerate that process, save time, save extra work, conduct the trial in a more timely fashion, recruit patients more efficiently, that's a huge cost saving. Now, that work, that service requires individuals with expertise, and so you have to pay for that in some fashion. And this is where the concept of a fee comes in. I don't know that we have a specific prescription in mind as to what that fee should be, but nevertheless, I think we need to at least acknowledge the fact that there is a value, there's a huge value that's being provided by SHIP, and that has a financial value as well as time, and all of which is important, I think, for the innovators.
Right, and I think some of this is also going to come up for tomorrow during the finance workstream presentations, and this is precisely what they're going to cover in terms of where exactly the fees, where's the funding model for this concept, and where the fees are going to be used for. So hopefully the answer that Dr. Del Nido provided today in conjunction with some of what is going to come in tomorrow for the finance workstream should make it really amply clear why, what are the benefits of SHIP MD, but then, what are also at the same time going to be the costs of getting those benefits.
Mm-hmm.
Any further feedback from the panelists? Okay. There's another question from Karen Feinberg, and that question says that at a seminar last evening related to tech pediatric medical innovations, they shared that a simple device as simple as an iPhone 6 could disrupt pacemakers. And I just attended a Smart Cities workshop, which of course includes IoT tech, and wonder how that might impact medical devices in children. Again, if any of you feel like you would be particularly good suited to answer this question, please just raise your hand and I'll redirect that question to you. So basically, she's wondering how some of the, let's just say, like medical device safety related issues like hacking, etc., or something like of that sort might, interfere with the function of some of the medical devices, and how that might impact development of these devices in children.
Yeah, Kamaljeet, I can go ahead and just provide my perspective.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously, there will be data that's required to send to the agency that looks at the impact of how the device is used, any potential challenges or issues with these. So these are studies that are probably going to have to be integrated, preclinical or EFS, and I think our FDA colleagues can probably speak to this a bit better than I can, but when I consider the data that we've been requested to send the FDA, it always includes information on how the device operates, how it operates, if it's being used incorrectly or if it's being used, under certain circumstances. And so I suspect that, having the knowledge base, like Pedro mentioned, to identify what these potential challenges are and answer those questions prior to submission is going to be very important.
Yes.
Add to that, yeah. So I think from the FDA perspective, it would certainly be part of the evaluation that we would expect to see, and it's typical for, the example that was mentioned in the question, I think, was pacemakers. It's pretty standard testing that we would see that would evaluate interference, and even more recently, an evaluation of cybersecurity. So I think that would be incorporated into the non-clinical testing that we would expect to see, and especially in devices for pediatric patients as well.
All right. Thank you, Nicole, and thank you, Susan.
Yeah, and this, Chester, I think if I could add, I think it just highlights the fact that software has been a much bigger part of medical device development. Mm-hmm. That software as a medical device itself, but also the software associated with hard medical devices in the first place. So I think it's a bigger issue. I do think that it is constantly addressed, with our FDA colleagues who are working on how to regulate that. So I think more is to come. I don't think all the answers are available now, but I think eventually we'll get there, as with other areas, including pediatric devices.
Right. Thank you so much, Chester. Okay. Any other feedback on this particular question? All right, Karen, just in case you have any further information that you would require about this question, please feel free to reach out to us, and we will be happy to further clarify in case, something that the panelists already said is not clear. Sorry, Chester, you have some other thoughts?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to shift the question a little bit, but I think it's a very important one. I was just looking at the chat, and sorry to preempt your moderating, but Gary Dulock asked a very important question about the gap analysis between adult and pediatric devices. Mm-hmm. I think it's very good for this audience to know that actually this meeting is really meeting 2.0. Meeting 1.0 actually took place in 2018, and another excellent meeting spearheaded by Vastin Paris at the FDA in response to legislation, where it is the public meeting on pediatric medical device development. And if one looks up and just does a search, there's a web page that's still active, but if one does a search for public meeting pediatric devices FDA, you'll find it. And actually that meeting was a several-day meeting that talked about, or where there are many presentations and all the issues of adult devices versus pediatric devices, as well as the differences in drug development and device development, all came to the forefront. And so there are the videos, the PowerPoint slides are available, the videos of the presentation are available, a lot of information is available there. That actually really does support the background of where we are now, which is really meeting 2.0, to talk about what can be done based on the issues that have been brought forward. So I'd say, if you haven't had a chance to look at that website, we're not able to attend that meeting in 2018, please do, especially before tomorrow, because I think what we've done here in this case study presentation really give you a tidbit of what is going to be talked about the next couple of days. We'll go into much more detail, for example, in our reimbursement work stream, but all the work streams, I think these case studies hopefully will help lay the groundwork for what are the problems. Just like the background that was laid out in 2018 in that meeting, and hopefully tomorrow we get into much more detail. And so all those questions that we're starting to discuss now, I think we'll be able to give much more detailed answers with the presentations and the panel discussions tomorrow. So thank you for the opportunity.
Right, absolutely. Well said, Chester. And yes, in response to that, please, everybody, do attend the breakout sessions tomorrow. There's going to be a lot of very valuable information that is going to be shown by all of our work streams. What we covered today is basically just the tip of an iceberg, if I have to make a correlation. But yeah.
So Kawaljeet, maybe I can jump in, just looking at the some of the questions in the chat box. One of the questions that came up is the cost of the hospital's charge for conducting these trials. I think it's important to recognize that every hospital has a different cost base, and conducting a clinical trial within an institution requires resources. And each hospital, because of their cost base, will have a different cost to them of participating in these clinical trials. I think this is where another aspect of SHIP that is, I think, of benefit to both the inventors and to the hospitals, and that is streamlining that process. In other words, if the discussion about the cost of conducting a clinical trial is done ahead of time, and so that each institution understands what their costs will be for the different trials, then at least you will have an upfront idea about what it'll cost for you to be able to sponsor a clinical trial with several institutions. And it's an important aspect of clinical trial design, particularly for pediatric devices, where you're going to need, in most cases, you're going to need several hospitals to be able to gather enough patients for completion of the study.
Maybe just to expand on that, Pedro, so folks will pick up on this and it'll be discussed in the hospital work stream, but the real advantage, again, of SHIP is that these costs are kind of pre-negotiated and pre-agreed upon by the hospitals in the system, so that there isn't that negotiation that has to take place on a one-by-one basis for folks that are coming into SHIP.
And this, Chester, just to add some additional information, what Pedro was mentioning, really about the unreimbursed costs for conducting these clinical trials. And I can give you the specific example. Texas Children's, we were one of the major sites to run the clinical trials for the Berlin Heart ventricular assist device way back then. We're not promoting a device, but really to give you an example, and it's well known. I've seen the presentations by our cardiovascular colleagues, surgical colleagues about that type of clinical trial, which actually took $1 million of unreimbursed costs by the hospital towards those clinical trials to get that approved. And, we're talking about one device, small number of patients, an extra $1 million that the hospital's not getting reimbursed. So it is a problem, and most hospitals can't support too many of those. Sometimes philanthropy plays a much bigger part. But these are all issues that are at the forefront now and are current, and that really does limit pediatric device development, especially these Class 3 devices. So I think more to come tomorrow. I think some of these issues will be brought forward, and hopefully there will be great solutions that will be discussed.
Yes, thanks, Chester. There's a question from Daniel Harvey about breakthrough designation. It's more of a comment rather than a question that breakthrough designation can be used for pediatric devices. CPMA 190016, PMA for pediatric focused system for office-based tympanostomy and achieve breakthrough designation during development. Does anyone have any comments about that?
If I can add, I would say that I agree with the comment that yes, breakthrough device designation is already occurring for pediatric devices. So as the PI for one of the pediatric device consortia supported by an FDA grant, I can tell you that all 5 consortia have those pediatric devices with breakthrough device designation in their portfolio. So it does occur. I would say, just to echo what our FDA PDC program colleagues would like to see is that when you submit those, be sure it says pediatric somewhere in the labeling. Mm-hmm. I'd love to see more of these devices designated as with pediatric labeling. But they do occur. I think it's very important. I think it's something that can be expanded upon. And I think we'll get into that a little bit more tomorrow about really pairing those FDA regulatory filings and approvals with a reimbursement aspect.
Right.
Yes. A lot of times money can be added to that. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what Daniel is trying to get to is that, what I understand, what the intent of that question is that how is SHIP MD supported breakthrough designation different from what is already being done currently? I think that's basically the intent of that question. But certainly I agree with you. Yes, go ahead, please.
And we'll cover that. I think we'll be covering that in the reimbursement sessions tomorrow. So please join.
Yeah, and also the regulatory sessions
as well.
Yes,
correct.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
And maybe I can just make a clarifying comment. So it's the breakthrough designation is agnostic. In other words, it's not specific to pediatrics, but it's not exclusive either. But what it does, the framework does specify is that it's for PMA, 510K, and de novo devices. And so if there's a pediatric device that's being developed and the plan is to go through a HUD and eventually an HDE pathway, the breakthrough designation may not necessarily apply. And so I think that's maybe where the gap could be.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. And another breakthrough designation related question coming from Sharif Charamam saying, realistically, as we discuss tomorrow, we, the pediatric innovators, are going to need to activate the patient advocates and lobby Congress to mandate coverage for innovative pediatric medical devices, starting with those receiving breakthrough designation.
Right. Yeah. Chester, so just to add, I mean, everyone understands the importance of the legislative fixes for some of these issues, but I think it's also important to keep in mind that's what we've been discussing as well as what can be addressed now? What can we do now with the current mechanisms that are already in place? And then also, and that's really more that what are the short-term solutions? Of course, also the long-term solutions, the ones that are lasting, that would be within legislative solutions. Yes, we need those as well. So we also keep in mind what can be done now, because we need these devices now, versus what will take an act of Congress, and that phrase does apply, to get these things done. And so we need both. And so I think we're also wary we need both of those to occur so that we both have short-term solutions as well as long-term solutions.
And I think just to follow up on what Chester said, I think there's a component of efficiency here. The resources and the knowledge is all there, but putting it all together in an efficient manner is what needs to be done. You don't need the act of Congress for that. That actually SHIP can do right now, and that's what one of its biggest value adds to the development of particularly a high-risk device. I think that's where SHIP can work with the inventor right away. The other aspects of it, yes, there's a lot of additional work that needs to be done, and particularly recognizing the specific needs of a pediatric device within the legislative system. But long before that occurs, I think there's a lot of work that can be done right now, as Chester points out.
Right.
If I could just add on to that also, from my perspective, like breakthrough designation is obviously a very specific pathway meant to take advantage or implement some efficiencies and streamlining, but also shortening of some timeframes to a certain extent. Ultimately, while SHIP-MD will help with facilitating, and bringing these technologies through sort of that breakthrough designation discussion and application process and all of that, that there are also similar efficiency and timeline improvements that can be had for devices developed within SHIP-MD that don't qualify for breakthrough designation. And by participating in SHIP, you could streamline any trials that you would need to be running as part of pre or post FDA submission and things of that nature for Class 2 devices. So you don't have to have breakthrough designation to participate in SHIP-MD.
Absolutely.
If I could add to that, so I think really regarding this case presentation session, if we're talking about Class 3 devices, the one that Pedro talked about, a heart valve device, I think that's where breakthrough device designation could assist. And just to get back to, we'll probably cover this a bit more for sure in the reimbursement, but breakthrough device designation, there is something that occurs currently, but for Medicare and adult devices, and that's a new technology add-on program. Now, I'm not a reimbursement expert, but my co-lead, Gordon Schatz, he and I will be running tomorrow's sessions. That will be discussed tomorrow because that is a framework that could occur for pediatric devices, but again, does not exist now. And the difference is that pediatric devices will be dependent on Medicaid. We do not have a lot of Medicare for pediatric devices, but this is something that exists already for Medicare government programs, combination of both a regulatory and a reimbursement to lead to potentially funds that could be available in the development stages. And so something to look forward to, I think, that potential solutions that can be worked upon.
Great. Now that you were talking about Class 2 devices, Ryan, there was another question from Kathleen Vincent. Do all Class 2 devices require a clinical trial for pediatrics, even if there is a 510K pathway defined?
So maybe some of the regulatory personnel with more expertise than me might add on to this as well. But from my perspective, I think it all depends on the type of Class 2 device technology you're talking about. If that technology is already FDA approved for a different indication, or the evidence to back up that technology as being effective and safe is already present, or if you have within that team of inventors or the company developing this technology a sufficient number of publications in humans in pediatrics in particular, showing some safety and efficacy, you may not need to conduct a clinical trial for the 510K pathway. I think the short answer is it depends.
Yeah. I think Nicole may be able to answer this question. Nicole, do you have any thoughts about that?
No, I agree with Ryan. I think that it really just depends on the device. It depends on the risk of the device, and I think there may be cases where clinical data might be needed to support, expansion into a pediatric population. But I can tell you that I have experience, and I've seen numerous devices that are Class 2 seeking a pediatric indication that didn't require clinical data. So I think that connecting with the FDA and sorting through those types of questions very early on is important. And the SHIP construct can assist with that, I think.
Thanks, Nicole. So just as an FYI to the attendees, I am working through the list of questions that I have received. It is going to be very possible that we would not be able to get to all of the questions, but I reassure you that even if I'm not able to get through all the questions and get you the answers, we will save your questions, and then we will reach out to you with the answers to the questions. So the next one in the list is, could you please elaborate on the creative mechanisms to balance pre-post marketing data requirements when you present to regulatory authorities? Perhaps Nicole, do you want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, sure. I can take a stab. So I think the pre-post market balance has been something that FDA has been interested in, and it's been a strategic priority of ours for a number of years now. I think implementation of it can sometimes be challenging, especially when it comes to, if there's a company that has an innovation and is coming to FDA to try to make the case for a pre-post market balance, it may be difficult to sort of discern where to start with that. I think looking at making a case for the patient population, making a case for the risk of the device, and making a case for, perhaps an unmet need and the ability to accept some degree of uncertainty in order to be able to get the device to patients in a more timely manner. And that's kind of the basis for, balancing pre and post market. And I think there are, several examples of how we've done this in the pediatric space, but certainly a need, of course, across the board for more. So it's very device dependent and area, device area specific or device area dependent. So I think there are ways to, develop perhaps a smaller size data set in the pre-market with a robust post-market data collection that can serve to sort of balance the data between pre and post-market. I think there are other situations where we may be able to borrow from some existing data. There may be data that's available, either outside the U.S. or from a different cohort of patients that may be relevant that you could use to then supplement with an additional, smaller data set. That's an example of a creative approach that we could potentially use. So I think there are a number of different opportunities for creative ways of going about it There's also, data that you might be able to take from the adult population and use it to leverage, a portion of that to support an additional pediatric cohort that would then support a pediatric indication. So a number of different creative ways that I think you could use to sort of balance that pre-post-market data collection, but really is very device dependent.
Thank you, Nicole. And okay, so the next one in my list is from Francis Richmond, and the question is, how do you see early and frequent interactions fitting with the usual Q-sub process with a long timeline these days? I see Ryan is smiling. Ryan, do you have any thoughts about this question?
Well, maybe I can start with that question. So I think the one thing that has changed regarding the FDA and perception of the FDA is that they've been much more helpful. I think I've heard that comment many times. I think many of us have that personal experience with it. They're much more approachable than they have been in the past, which is a good thing. I could say that, one thing that we do or is available through the Pediatric Device Consortium program is that innovators can approach our pediatric colleagues with early meetings to discuss more general terms about the regulatory pathway that should be considered. And these are with some of our promotional or more on our policy side of the FDA. And I think that's a great partnership to allow innovators that early access to help in terms of streamlining their interactions with our FDA colleagues, especially on the examiner reviewer side. So I think things have changed. I think there are many more avenues available now, and all the Pediatric Device Consortium are happy to assist with that.
I would add, just from a personal perspective, at least my experience has been that initiating the discussion early as part of a pre-sub meeting and then follow-up on additional questions or additional data as it's coming out is something that can occur with the FDA examiner, and in fact is extremely helpful because it really avoids going down rabbit holes pursuing information that's going to be irrelevant or really not helpful in the process. My experience is that it is enormously helpful and should really be encouraged, particularly if you have something that is really novel. And I think the FDA itself needs to understand more about how it works and what the potential pitfalls might be. I think getting that process started early is very important.
Yeah, I would echo Chester and Pedro's comments on this, and just add from my personal experience that the pre-submission program is a very useful program that I would highly recommend, having gone through and had several meetings myself, and that, this being something that was created out of need, and as it continues to be utilized and demand from companies looking to submit to the FDA, as they start to take part in this more and more, I envision that this will be a process that will continue to be refined and hopefully, lengthy delays between meetings or things of that nature can be continued to be further streamlined.
Thank you, Ryan, and thanks, Nicole and Pedro. There was a question from Laura Clemenson. How does a company go about having an initial meeting with ShipMD to evaluate based upon where we are in the process? Best place to provide assistance, I believe. So
I think maybe I can tackle it. So that will be discussed in the navigation workshop because that is one of the issues that we want to talk about, and we want to get feedback from the participants in this conference. There are many areas that you can enter, as I showed previously in the timeline. And the idea is that SHIP will set up a system whereby an application will be required. It'll require sufficient information to be able to evaluate not only the device but also where the development, where the company is as far as the development and how it would fit. But that is the planned process. But I would encourage you to attend the navigation workshop where some of those questions are going to be addressed.
Yeah. And if I could add to Pedro's comments, I mean, where can the company go now for assistance before the ShipMD ecosystem is fully developed? I'd say it does exist already now, and that's really through the Pediatric Device Consortium program. And so there are 5 national centers, of which Southwest PUC is one, Basic Texas Children's Hospital, Baylor College of Medicine, but the other 4 are UCSF Stanford, Children's LA USC, Children's National, as well as the Pennsylvania, which is CHOP and University of Pittsburgh. They exist now. So if there is a pediatric device company and you think you need assistance, we can help at all stages, and it exists now. So please reach out for that. I do think that Sunny Kim raised a good question of, we have consortia, the term consortia used a lot, and so how do the pediatric device consortia versus ShipMD versus JLabs, what's the difference between all of them? If I can just clarify that briefly, I mean, ShipMD, ShipMD is a proposed, I would call it public-private partnership, and this is my interpretation of it, that will create an ecosystem for pediatric devices that probably different than what's occurring now. The pediatric device consortia, which currently exist now, we are based at academic centers and children's hospitals, and we help out innovators to get their devices moving forward. It could be very early as a idea to concept to prototype and later stages. Our funding is limited in terms of helping you use the early stages, but we do have connections to accelerators and innovators. And I think that's where the JLabs are, like other accelerators and innovators. They're accelerators to help maybe the later stage ones to move forward, that they have space available where you can house your startup company. They have funding. They also have ecosystems with experts that may help to develop your company. So think about that. There are many stakeholders that are part of ShipMD, and that includes the device consortia, academic centers, FDA, advocacy groups like the AEP, CPAF as well, who are experienced at creating these public-private partnerships. So a lot of stakeholders, and it is important to kind of know who is who, so you go to the right place for assistance for your company.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Chester. So just a clock check. We have 4 minutes into the session left, and I have several questions that I haven't even touched. So I'm going to take a crack at a couple of them, hopefully in the next few minutes that we have, and then for the rest of them, we'll reach out to you offline with the answers to those questions. And one of the questions that I'll ask you is many studies, it's a question from Pam Simpkins. Many studies require a large number of sites given the geographic distribution of a small number of patients. How will ShipMD ensure that all of the sites are study ready in terms of things like resources, training, interest, etc.?
Yeah, I can answer that. So that again will be discussed in the hospital work stream tomorrow, but there will be a pre-qualification process for hospitals, and the hospitals themselves will be structured in a book format so that we can accommodate the numbers that are needed to satisfy the sample sizes for these studies.
Okay, thanks, Susan. Okay, one more question from Roger Bagwell is there an effort to make FDA more willing to accept risk? We have a very low risk device. It has adult indications for use. FDA insisted on pediatric data, and we've been using a clinical study for 6 years. Tons and tons of dollars and time spent for little reasons. So you want to say that? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I think the risk is a great question, and I think it's something that has certainly evolved over the last several years at FDA. We put out a few years ago an uncertainty guidance where we sort of did a sort of self-reflection a little bit on what degree of uncertainty we're willing to accept, or we should be, or the community should be willing to accept. And I think there's some good discussion in that guidance document in particular about where the level of risk lies and how we should sort of gauge uncertainty when determining pre-market requirements for getting a device into the field. And so I think that, like I said, it's sort of evolved over the years, and I certainly think that FDA has a little bit of a different lens in looking at benefit risk. And I think in particular for pediatric applications, there's a new lens that we've been able to sort of look through for these types of innovations. So I think that I am optimistic that going forward that, there will be opportunities for maybe a little bit of a bit more risk taking when it comes to these types of innovations. And I think that, like in many cases, as I said before, it depends on the device, it depends on the need, and it depends on the risk. And so I'm optimistic that the consortium can assist with that, but also that in concert with FDA that, we will work together with the medical device community to kind of bring these innovations to the market.
Right. And if I could add to that, I'd say from the hospital side, I think children's hospitals in general have always had an emphasis on safety and quality. So if risk is going to be taken, it should be taken in the setting of one that can monitor the safety and quality. And so that's why this whole process is really based at the systems of hospitals innovating pediatrics, really based out of children's hospitals. So using an existing structure that already emphasizes safety and quality for innovative work. So I think that's where the hospital base is important in all this, children's hospital based.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Chester, and thanks, Nicole.